let's now take a look at another one. This one does not involve the pawn, but involves rather the king and the rook. So let's go. Let's take a look. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. These are just sample moves. When learning to play chess, these will often be your first moves. I'll explain that in a later lecture. And here, what we have is a situation where there are two empty squares between the king and the rook. Okay, so the king and the rook. So with two empty squares between the king and the rook, this means we're allowed to move our king 2 squares, not just one, but 2 squares to g1. And once that happens, I'm going to let go here. The rook then jumps over and comes to f1. It's the only case in a given chess game where any piece other than a knight can jump over another piece. The rook has just jumped over the king. But there are a few exceptions to this rule. So what are these exceptions? When can we not castle? Okay, so let's just set up another position. And now, instead of having a white bishop on c4 and a black bishop on c5, now we have a white bishop on c5 and a black bishop on c4. Of course, this position is impossible, because white has 2 dark squared bishops, and all of his pawns. But let's just, for the sake of demonstration, we'll take it anyway. Now here, white cannot play castling because the king cannot castle through check. Now there are other exceptions to this as well. Suppose setting up our position, our legal position again, with bishop on c4 and bishop on c5. Now let's instead see what happens if black has a queen on e4. Now we can see that this position here is check, because this queen, which can move laterally or diagonally, is attacking this white king. Now another rule regarding castling is that you can't castle out of check. That is, we're in check, and so to run away, we can't play king to g1 followed up with rook to f1 in one move. We can't castle because we're in check. And there's one more exception. Suppose we have the following sequence of moves. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. Now suppose white here plays king e2. He decides that he wants to get his king into the game. This is a terrible idea, but suppose white has it anyway. Now here black just continues developing with knight to f6. White brings the king back to e1. He decides, nah, he realizes this is a terrible plan. Let's just get back and castle. Now black, being a beginner player, doesn't notice the free pawn on e4, and he castles himself. Now, can white castle here? Now, based on your knowledge, white can castle, at least assuming that you didn't know the rules before watching this video. But in fact, white can't castle here. Because you cannot castle a king that is also moved. So here we can't castle because the king has moved to e2, and then back to d1. So we can't castle. And one final word about castling. Notice how in every example here, I've shown positions where there are no squares between the king and the king rook. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the king rook. It can also be the queen rook. Let's take this following position here. So let's just say d4, d5, no, not g4. Bishop f4. This is sample moves, so not necessarily good ones. This is sample moves that demonstrates on them. Queen d2, queen d7. Now here, there are no squares between the white king and the white queen rook on a1. Can we castle? Yes. How do we castle? That becomes a better question. Well, we move the king 2 squares to the side. So the king comes to c1. And the rook will come to d1. Once we've castled, it'll look something like this. So anyway, there are all these special moves covered in this video. But we have one more thing to learn. How do you win the game of chess? You know, it's good knowing the rules, but if you don't know what to do, how do you win? Well, it's actually fairly simple. Take, for example, this position here. Here, pardon me. Here, black is in check. We can see that. The queen attacks the king. Here, the black king has no squares to move to. Anywhere it moves, it will be in check. Now, there's a name for this type of position. It's one you'll often hear used metaphorically in other situations. It's known as checkmate. It means the game is over, you win. The aim of the game is to reach a position where the opponent has no legal moves. That is, where the opponent is in check and has no legal moves. So that is when the opponent's king is being attacked by one of your pieces, and that king cannot move anywhere. No pieces can interpose the check, and the piece or pieces giving check cannot be taken. And this is known as checkmate. This is how you win the game. But in chess, we don't always have wins. We also have draws. Of course, we have losses. But there's draws. How do we have these? Well, there are a few ways that we can have draws. The first, and this is the most well-known, is stalemate. When the opponent has no legal moves, as in checkmate, but instead of being in check, is not in check, it's known as stalemate. In this position, the black king can't go anywhere, but it's not being attacked either. And as such, this position is stalemate. It's draw. Another way to draw is what's known as triple repetition. So, if the same position occurs 3 times, then it's a draw, regardless of however many moves have been played in between. So, say for example, if knight f3, so here white plays knight f3, okay, black plays knight f6, we've somehow given black the move here, knight f3, and now knight g8. White decides knight g1, black decides knight f6, white decides knight f3, black decides knight g8, and white decides knight g1. This position here has occurred 3 times. Here we have triple repetition. The game is a draw. And the final way the game can be drawn is known as the 50 move rule. So if any given and this is a very rare way to draw, but if in any given game, pardon me, no, this is not the last way. There's one other way I should show you. It's known as insufficient material. If at any point you reach material that cannot possibly mate your opponent, then the game is officially declared drawn. So that is, if you reach a position where you only have a bishop or you only have a knight, then the game is officially declared a draw. Technically, you can't force win with 2 knights, but it's possible to win if your opponent plays badly, so that's not an official draw. And if you only have a king, of course, we have insufficient mating material, as in here. It's impossible for white to checkmate the black king and vice versa. The game is a draw. Okay, and now on to the final way to draw a chess game, the 50 move rule, which states that if 50 moves pass without a capture or pawn move, then the game is declared a draw. So say, for example, if we had shuffling of the knights, as in the previous example, but we didn't repeat the position even once, or at least not more than the 3-time maximum. But this went on for 50 moves. There was no movement of the pawn. No pieces were taken. The game would be a draw. The game is a draw if 50 moves pass at any point, whether or not it starts off with a knight shuffling, or whether or not we play e4 or e5 in this case first. Now, if we had this knight shuffling, as demonstrated before, for 50 moves, the game would be a draw because it's the 50 move rule. If 50 moves pass without a pawn move or a capture, the game is a draw. Now, how you'll know when 50 moves is passed? You'll have to be recording the game or be playing on an online server for that to be the case. And I'll explain how to record the game and to read recordings of the game in the next video. But until then, I thank you for watching this video, and I ask you to join me in lesson 0C, assuming you don't already know how we can read and write in chess. So I'll hope to join you in lesson 0C, the notation of the game. Until then, see you next time.